As evident by the nature of creating art, films have a way of revealing relevant social and political issues of whatever time they were produced. Generally, there is no shortage of analyses of these pieces individually, but as far as comprehensive histories of specific film trends go, these seem to be fewer. One trend that seems to be particularly relevant in today's current American context is what can be defined as the paranoid mind game film. The purpose of my study was to track this film mode from its genesis in the 1950s to present day and deeply analyze a contemporary example of this through examining the Apple TV Plus series Severance. The goal was to see where this trend has gone in the past and where it currently stands in terms of commenting on social and political issues in America. Mainly, Severance comments on the interaction of control and disciplinary societies and how they influence subjectivity. It asserts that even though there is no escape from either of these structures, true subjectivity can be found amongst harsh systems of control. This video serves as a summary for my year-long research on this topic, which was conducted through combined viewings of several eras of the paranoid mind game film to highlight Severance from today's perspective. I will first define and discuss the history of the paranoid mind game film. I will then introduce Severance and comment on the ways that it reveals certain social and political concerns within contemporary American society. Beginning in the 1950s, the existence of the paranoid thriller emerged as a way for filmmakers to deliver their concerns over foreign influence through allegories and exaggeration. Generally, these films showed characters questioning themselves and the structures around them in order to find some sort of answers about the world. One of the first films to do this was Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956, which used the concept of alien invaders to warn Americans about the growing presence of communism. Continuing this theme were films like The Manchurian Candidate in 1962, that was a more blatant depiction of outside infiltration, as it depicted soldiers coming home from war having been brainwashed by a foreign government. Both of these films include a character that ultimately uncovers the truth about their situation. Moving into the 1970s, the trend continued with a slight pivot where filmmakers seemed to be more concerned with encroaching conservatism and the perceived threat of surveillance. Films such as The Parallax View and The Conversation in 1974 were direct responses to events such as the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, which fostered mistrust in the government during this period. Moving through to the 1990s, where the world became even more complicated due to the introduction of technology such as cell phones and email, the classification of these types of films changed from being paranoid thrillers to the mind game. This term, coined by film scholar Thomas Elsesser, refers to the film trend that is dedicated to playing games with the minds of its characters and its audience. There's typically some sort of puzzle narrative included that intentionally elicits confusion from its viewer. Films that exemplify this include The Truman Show and Dark City, which depict characters questioning their surroundings in more complex ways as they comment on the forms of society itself in relation to the individual. This is carried through the 2000s and 2010s as the interaction of politics and the self are seen through narratives such as Minority Report in 2002 and the Jason Bourne series throughout the 2000s. Following this trend through until present day, one question remains: what now? What do current pieces of paranoid mind game media say about today? With the boom of content being produced by streaming services, the ability to disperse quality pieces of media has grown. This means that in order to provide a full analysis of the current state of this trend, this section of film and television should be addressed. This brings us to Severance. Severance is a 2022 dystopian drama series that takes place in present-day America and focuses on the branch of a giant corporation, Lumen, where its employees have agreed to have their work lives and home lives surgically separated. This effectively creates two versions of each employee that do not know what the other does. The main conflict lies in the ethics of this idea, what the procedure is being used for, and the employees' persistent attempts to find out the truth about their situations. In summary, the series follows Mark, the newly appointed head of the macro data refinement branch on the severed floor of Lumen Industries, in addition to his co-workers Dylan, Irving, and Helly, a newly severed employee. The series mainly follows the two versions of Mark both inside and outside the company, as the two pieces of himself work toward finding out information about the other. Eventually, the innies in Mark's branch join in on this desire to learn about their outside selves and learn pieces of the truth about their outies. Severance's position in the modern era of paranoid mind game media comments on the structures meant to contain and control members of a society. The main mechanism of the show, the Severance procedure, is introduced in order to counteract what philosopher Gilles Deleuze defines as the control society, which can be used to identify the world that we currently live in. This structure can be described as a society in which participants have the illusion of freedom, but are ultimately controlled by the system. An example of this would be in the flexibility to work from home, which has greatly expanded since the COVID-19 pandemic. Employees are able to work from anywhere, which sounds appealing, but effectively makes it so that they are always at work. This is in direct contrast to the concept of the disciplinary society, which is a term coined by Michel Foucault in the 1970s. This system imposes control with the knowledge of its participants. An example of this would be at schools or in the workplace where people are being monitored, they just don't know exactly when. But what happens when the control society is aimed to be eliminated? This is where Severance comes in. In theory, this system works perfectly. By having work and home separate, each situation should be a utopia. But this ends up in a disaster due to human nature. Instead, the inside of Lumen becomes an intense disciplinary system, and outside of the company, the employees are still being controlled, they just don't know it. With the ability to ensure that the secrets of Lumen will not be spread past the severed floor, the management of the company, who are not severed, take advantage of their power through harsh restrictions and punishments. This is evident by the use of the break room, which is essentially a torture chamber for the innies. But this control doesn't stop there, as when the characters exit Lumen, they become their outer selves, and they are still being manipulated by the agents of the company. The most blatant piece of control imposed on the outies is the withholding or manipulation of information about the company, which is shown not only through there being code detectors in the elevators to prevent information from going in or out, but also through Lumen conveying false information to the outies. An example of this is when Helly, the new employee, throws a speaker at Mark's head, giving him a nasty cut. Once the workday ends, Mark walks outside to find a note on his car stating that his injury was due to him slipping on a projector slide and falling. This false information that only the audience knows about is another way that the company overextends its control and makes the viewers question what other pieces of information Lumen may be lying about. Ultimately, the interaction of the disciplinary society inside of Lumen with the control society outside of Lumen renders the Severance procedure a fool's errand. Each part of the self has no reason to assume that the other is not content, so they each go on with their lives assuming that everything is fine. But how do all of these flaws within the system affect the individual? Generally, the splitting of memories elicits paranoia in the participants as they question what their other self is like. This goes from speculation to paranoia and longing to be reunited with themselves. The efforts by this group to find the truth about their lives pushes them closer to true subjectivity. This is exhibited by the majority of the severed characters, but is most effectively portrayed by Mark as his innie, subject to the disciplinary society, and outie, subject to control society, exhibit more similar traits to each other as he learns more information about the company and himself. In addition to this, the show also asserts that this inevitable finding of oneself is typically more challenging for those in positions of power within the system. Through this, the show suggests that there is a medium between the disciplinary and control society in which true subjectivity can be found. Overall, the collective analysis of the Paranoid Mind Game film reveals what political and social issues were important at the time in America. The prominence of this film trend also suggests that understanding it might allow for greater comprehension of social and political issues by the general public.